you, Director. The time is now 4:03 p.m. Director Pine, and you can call the meeting to order.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the One Shoreline Board meeting for Monday, May 22nd, 2023. If we could have the roll call, Mr. Clerk.
Sure, thank you. Director Chuang,
Present.
thank you. Director Colson,
Here.
Director Gauchier,
Here.
thank you. Director Mueller, it's currently absent. Director Rack,
Here.
thank you. Director Ruddick. Okay, she's also currently absent. And then Chair Pine,
Present.
thank you. And Colin, if you could just let me know once the other two directors arrive, so I'll update.
Yeah, Director Ruddick is under the weather, so we're not expecting her today.
Okay,
And Director Mueller is hoping that to join us, but may not be able to till the very end of the meeting. So that's the status of.
thank you.
Okay, we begin the meeting as always with an opportunity for public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak on items that are not on the agenda. Since they're not agendized, we can't get into a discussion about them, but we always welcome the public comment. So let's check on public comment today.
Yes, thank you, Chair Pine. That's correct. I do see one hand raised. Carlisle, I'll call on you and then you'll have 2 minutes. So please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I live out on the coast in Moss Beach, and I sent an email, I think 2 meetings ago, and I can't see where you have listed your minutes of public comments or received written public comments. So is there a spot somewhere on your website where you do that? Because I couldn't find the minutes from the last meetings either, except last year's meetings. Thank you. I guess you can't answer me, but maybe somebody could type it into the chat.
Yeah, we can address that question. With respect to the minutes, we did fall behind in the minutes. At this meeting, as you might see in the agenda, we're approving the minutes, 3 sets of minutes for 2023. So we'll be caught up with our minutes after today's meeting. And Mr. Manaman, you can speak to where things are posted.
Yeah, so the public comments or the commenters are listed in the public comments as part of the minutes, but currently we don't put up on our website, let's say, written comments, but they're distributed per the request of the public commenter, who they wish to minutes to go to. So I don't know. We can think about that. We hadn't really thought about if we get a written comments, do we put them up or where do we put them up? I don't know if there's a common practice for that for cities in the county, but I don't know. Mr. Coolidge, Brian is remote today. Maybe he hasn't thought about that.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, you and I can maybe talk about that offline about kind of the kind of preferred practice for the posting of written comments.
Okay.
If that's acceptable.
That sounds good to me.
Great, thank you.
All right, any other public comment?
Thank you, Chair Pine. I'll make the last call for folks to raise their hand for regular public comment. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised, so back to you, Chair.
All right, thank you. We can now take action to set the agenda and approve the consent agenda. As I mentioned, the consent agenda consists of approving minutes for the meetings of January 30th, February 27th, and April 24th.
So, second.
All right.
Yours.
Motion by Copeland, second by Gauchier.
Yes.
I'll take the roll call. Director Chuang.
Aye.
Thank you. Director Colson.
Yes.
Director Gauchier.
Yes.
Thank you. Director Rack
Yes.
and Chair Pine.
Yes.
Thank you. Minutes are approved, and the agenda is set with the Directors Mueller and Ruddick being absent.
All right, moving on to regular business. Our first item today is an update on the planning guidance policy, which was circulated for public comment, and we have received some comment, and Mr. Madman will update us on those comments and the status of the document.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Right, so what I'll do is run through very quickly for anybody that's on this meeting but missed the previous many meetings where we talked about this, just what this document is. If there are comments brought forward today, then we'll take them to account, of course, but the public comment period closed on Friday. And the idea is that, as you'll see in this upcoming slide, the idea is that this document is finalized for board consideration in the next meeting, which is in June 26th. So what the document is, or why develop a document like this, there are general plans. Oh, let me do, sorry, I'm not sharing. I was, but for some reason I was kicked off. So. There we go. Okay. I can minimize that.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So hopefully everyone can see that online as well. Why develop a document? Because the core planning documents of local jurisdictions consisting of general plans, specific plans, and zoning ordinances guide development, but do not account for future conditions associated with climate change, especially atmospheric rivers and sea level rise. That doesn't change. The new developments intended to last for a long time, decades, would need to be retrofitted, and there are many new developments proposed on the Bay shoreline of our county. So that's kind of the narrative of why we're doing this. Slide a bit of the history. Again, I'll go through this much more briefly than we did last time. We've been working on this really since 2021, when the city of Burlingame came to One Shoreline and sought our support in developing a chapter in their zoning ordinance related to sea level rise. That was approved by the city council in December 2021. Part of that involved looking at how other jurisdictions or the state, in the case of Rhode Island, handle this issue. In 2022 and earlier this year, the cities of South San Francisco, San Mateo, and San Carlos included in either their general plan or in the case of South City, also their zoning ordinance, the same issue. And that led us to put the document out on April 19th, our planning guidance policy, which is online and will remain online after public comment period and henceforth on our website. And so what it is, really the key points in all this are that it's a resource that's standardized and evolving for jurisdictions, for individuals and organizations that want to follow land use and weigh in on it and understand some of the issues involved with climate change and land use. And it's also, we hope to serve as a model for other jurisdictions around the Bay and elsewhere. It's voluntary guidance. The cities and the county are responsible for land use and have that authority. One Shoreline does not. It's not a mandatory regulation. It's an actionable template. That's template language jurisdictions stick into their documents. It's focused at this point on new private development. And again, it's an evolving resource, pending new information about climate change science, as well as kind of responses to this document and how this plays out for jurisdictions. What's in the document includes information on One Shoreline and our Bay Protection Standard, our role in technical assistance, specific language, template language for general plans and specific plans, much more specific language for zoning ordinances, including buffer zones or setbacks from water, requirements related to shoreline protection infrastructure, elevating first floor developments, stormwater capture, groundwater rise, and then finally regarding the developments, template language for approvals and developments that relate to our Bay Protection Standard. Either developers build it or are our recommendation is, if not, they provide the space and the land rights to cities, so that it's the city or what shoreline can build it later. There is a map of future conditions that was also in the Burlingame zoning ordinance, but now it's online and interactive. And it's for the whole bay shoreline of San Mateo County, all 12 jurisdictions, which includes San Bruno, that doesn't technically touch the bay, but is influenced by it. This includes the bay protection standard for the actual shoreline, and it includes a sea level rise overlays layer, where areas in the yellow are recommended to be subject to relevant zoning requirements, and a shallow groundwater rise layer, which also has suggested language about zoning requirements. What you see on the screen here is the city of Brisbane, and I made a presentation to their city council last Thursday night, and discussed this with them, and as well as issues that they're looking at regarding a major development called Baylands in Brisbane right now. And interestingly, I thought I'd point out on the shallow groundwater rise, which we haven't talked a lot about, it's really an emerging field for all jurisdictions to understand exactly what the impacts are. But it is in our map of future conditions, and for an area like Foster City, which of course is constructing a wall and levee around it related to bay water level. As you can see, the issue of groundwater rise doesn't have any interest in whether there are walls or not, and it affects all of Foster City like it does all the jurisdictions that are right along the bay. So that's something that we'll all be talking about more in the future. Here's the timeline on the planning guidance policy. So we released it on April 19th, sent it out very broadly via email to jurisdictions and individuals and nonprofits around the Bay Area. We discussed it at our last board meeting in some detail, along with our chief consultant on the project called Good City Company, and McKenna Wong, project manager on it. On May 9th, McKenna and Good City led a public information and feedback session. And on May 19th, the public comment period ended. I'll go through the comments or generalize what the comments we received by Friday end of the day. Today, we're talking about it again and again. I plan to bring it to the board June 26th for approval. So the comments received. First of all, a little bit of background. The first bullet is just about the jurisdictions that and entities that were consulted, or their documents were consulted in the development of the document of the planning guidance policy. Prior to us putting it out in public, we incorporated over 300 comments received from 10 of the shoreline cities, as well as the county, BCDC, CCAG, the San Francisco Estuary Institute, and 2 consulting firms that were technical reviewers of the document, one on the engineering side, one on the land use side. During the public comment period, so since April 19th through Friday, we received comments, written and verbal, I guess you could say, comment from 20 organizations or individuals. In terms of who we received comments from, the written comments from BCDC, San Mateo County, CCAG, and the San Francisco Joint Powers Authority. We received comments from several developers or developer associations and design firms who do work for developers. We received comments from SFEI, the Sierra Club, the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge, and Mid-Peninsula Open Space District, and SPUR, which is a land use interested organization in San Francisco, based in San Francisco, as well as the North Fair Oaks Community Alliance and an individual, Janet Davis. And we received, we could say, verbal comments from Climate Resilient Communities, which is a nonprofit based in East Palo Alto, Thrive organization, which is a countywide organization interested in all kinds of issues, and Rise South City, which is a nonprofit that works on climate issues in South San Francisco, as well as our program manager at State Coastal Conservancy on a major grant that we have. Some of the themes of the comments are in those 4 bullet points that have arrows associated with questions about how we define the shoreline and in the map of future conditions, which I showed, interest in adding kind of local nuance to our bay protection standard. And just kind of figuring out or wanting to help us figure out how we maybe have different standards in different parts of the bay or different parts of our shoreline, depending on kind of what the local environment is. And so we've thought about that prior to putting out the document. It's not a new concept. And the rub is we understand that not every aspect of the shoreline, our county shoreline, is equal. But part of the reason to do this is alignment among all the cities, and it would be super complicated and kind of go against that general alignment to start parsing out specific reaches of shoreline. And so at this stage, we kind of left it as a countywide standard for the 53 miles. Let's see, other comment? Yeah,
May I ask just a quick question?
sure.
So, but wouldn't that be germane to each local? So each city would have their own zoning code that was with regard to theirs. So they could take the one shoreline document as the prototype and the baseline, and then they could add in nuances that reflect, right? And so to me, I agree with you. I just want to make sure we had it. What I understood was this is a baseline. Here's the help, and then we can customize it for each particular circumstance, right?
That's right. I mean, our assumption is that every city has different circumstances, environments, political interests, et cetera. And this is really a guidance document for everybody to take and run with. And we hope everybody runs with it, everybody meaning these 12 cities on some level, but how they do that is subject to their planning commissions, the city councils and publics and private interests.
Zoning code, et
Yeah.
cetera.
Yeah, and so,
The hope would be they would all plan to the same sea rise
Yeah.
standard, right?
that's the hope. Yep, that's right.
But someone who's got a built environment versus someone who's got a developing environment, they may have different interpretations or adaptation strategies. So it makes sense to me. I would not, it would be too specific, and I think we wouldn't be able to capture every element of specificity on the whole Bay Coast line. But as I do think we could put in maybe an appendix, and as interesting things come up that cities do that are specific to their city, maybe we would have an appendix with a reference to that we would just constantly update to share new and innovative strategies that additional cities thought of or came up with.
Yeah, yeah.
Something like that to make it more of a living document.
For sure. Means, yeah, absolutely. Essentially, it's at this point, a web-based document, right? And so we can always add additional links and elements to that page. So other themes of comments. One, interest in our support and technical assistance in development reviews. Questions about what that looks like and interest in talking to us about it, which is a good thing. And generally, there were a lot of positive comments about the fact that we came out with this in the first place, and the document is well organized, things like that. So that was nice to see. So those are the comments. So we will, again, a lot of them were received on Friday, so we don't have this kind of full analysis on it. But we will do that. McKinley and our good city consultants will do that. And as is appropriate, incorporate aspects of the comments into the document over the next 4 weeks or so. So then finally, the feedback and input will be incorporated into our document that's put out prior to the June 26th board meeting. That's the plan. So are there questions or comments?
Yes.
Lynn, I don't know if you've followed up with, or if the city has followed up with you, but have you had a meeting with East Palo Alto staff?
So I got a message from Ramey Associates, which is a firm that East Palo Alto has hired to do, like, one of our comments was from the Ravenswood Business District. So I'll say that was a big, they sent a letter in. And then I had a request to meet from Ramey and Associates, and we have something on the schedule to do that.
Okay.
And there was a discussion of whether, I think Good City would bring this up at a staff meeting at the city, right? Did that
We
happen?
follow on to staff, planning staff meeting, they have like a standing meeting that there could be an opportunity for one shoreline and Good City to present. We discussed that opportunity.
They haven't heard.
I think the Sierra Club or Bay Alive had a question about building in the Bay mud and ensuring that we're not allowing developers to build solutions out in the mud area as well.
Yeah, one of their comments spoke to how we define the buffer zone and whether or not we would define it, where the shoreline is defined, which relates to a lot of comments of how we define the Bay shoreline and whether the buffer zone applies to just Bay fill or farther inland than that. So that's something that we'll have to consider and think about how we define the shoreline. That relates to there's one, comment here came on that.
I mean, we in our document, we define the shoreline in the same way BCDC defines it. Not because it's necessarily the best definition, but it's the definition that everyone accepts at this point, and it's regulated by state law, and so it makes sense to kind of put our marker in the ground, so to speak, and associate that marker with the state definition. Thank you.
So with her, may I?
Yes, of course.
So how does that impact, say, for example, if, like I know in Sausalito, for example, they're looking at putting man-made oyster bed type things offshore. So is the Sierra Club position like nothing man-made going, even if it's mimicking nature, or is that what they're commenting on, or is it more around the?
I haven't.
Yeah.
dug into the details of
I
their
don't think-
comment.
Okay, we don't
I mean,
really know.
so you're asking a really important question that we're wrestling with on the Burlingame Millbrae project.
Yeah.
And that is, and we've discussed this exact question with UCDC. And that is, in order to modulate the bay water level on the shoreline,
Mhm.
is it acceptable to put things in the water that help us to modulate that? Rather than just build defenses on the shoreline? Do we need to look at other ways to deal with the issue of rising sea level? Because not only, if you don't do anything in the water or in the marshes, then not only does that affect your ability to and the height of and all aspects of what your shoreline treatment is, but also the water level of the creeks is pretty substantial. And right now, the tide is well in the shoreline of many creeks. For example, in San Francisco, it's west of Highway 101. In Burlingame now, it goes pretty far into beyond 101. And that will just get more substantial and worse, if you will. And it affects flooding and stormwater drainage during storms as well, when there's high tides. So if you can't modulate the bay water level, it becomes very difficult also to protect along the creeks. So we're looking at the question of, like what Sausalito was talking about, can you put things in the water that have maybe natural benefit, like oyster beds or other kinds of treatments on these things, but can you put them in the water and that will help you on the land? And we're looking at the different alternatives for the Millbrae and Burlingame shoreline right now. And we can almost guarantee that one of those alternatives will include offshore treatments, because from our perspective, it has to be done. You literally cannot just rely on onshore treatments, but that's controversial because it's filling the bay.
Mhm.
Even with natural elements, it's filling the bay. And so it takes different thinking from BCDC. So we sat down with BCDC staff to talk about this, and they had concerns that they weren't. I would say that their concerns were not, this is impossible. It was just, this is super complicated and we need to take a close look at it,
Mhm.
which is fine.
Mhm.
That's how it should be. So. Other.
Yeah, through the
Yeah.
chair. So one of the questions that I have is that I know that you meant this to be a living document. So how often are you planning to update? Depends on the comments, or depends on as the cities have implemented to overlay the policies on their planning, just in terms of the time frame.
Yeah. We talked about that, and I would say it would be prudent to revisit this. Well, next year we plan to put out by the end of next year, we plan to put out a document for capital plan. Similar to this, looking at public infrastructure, utilities, those kinds of things, not private buildings. I think at that point, we'll have a chance to improve upon what we did this year. We learn from it, and the cities will get feedback from the cities and the public. And I would think it would be prudent to maybe at this point, think about in 2025, 2 years from now, kind of learning from this experience on this document and updating it. After that, you know, when the cities have started, most of the cities have started to put into their general plan, specific plans, zoning ordinance, these kinds of things, and have an experience with development reviews. I would think it would be maybe more episodic based on new information related to groundwater. And I don't want to think of it as, I wouldn't personally think of it as these updates need to be like a general plan update that takes years, and you know, you plan for 2 years ahead and you hire consultants and you don't do it very often, or a zoning ordinance update. I'm thinking in terms of, if there's a lot of new groundwater information 2 years from now, we should definitely update the groundwater section so that everybody can benefit from it, and not just say, we're only going to do this on a, you know, every 3-year cycle or something like that.
Thank you.
And could you describe the feedback that we received from BCDC and our reaction to that?
Do you want to do that, McKenna? Because I haven't dove into it since Friday.
Yeah, I think a lot of it echoed they had a very detailed comment letter on the early draft. We gave them an early draft back in February before public comment period opened. And a lot of their comments just touched on very similar themes, mainly related, I would say, to that second arrow, interest in adding local circumstances and nuance to the Bay Protection Standard. So the Bay Adapt process that BCDC is going through, and then they're currently working on a regional planning guidance that could be similar to what we're doing. They're looking to incorporate a lot more of a pathways approach, maybe having it be locally driven rather than setting an elevation standard. So there were a lot of comments related to that, and how when Shoreline is taking this Bay Protection Standard approach, which might be setting an elevation standard, might be focused on a protection objective rather than other types of land use decisions. So yeah, that was a lot of their comments spoke to that, and just making sure that there's an emphasis on alignment with BCDC guidelines and policies, which we try to lead throughout more on a high level. I think a lot of that will have to be negotiated on a project specific basis as a project scope of work. But yeah, I think a lot of it was very similar to what their letter was for in the early draft.
I mean, there's going to be a tension between BCDC guidance and standards and the local level, and there always is. It's not like this document is a new dynamic, part of that dynamic. But yeah, I mean, and the County of Marin recently approved a guidance document related to sea level rise, and it's not exactly what BCDC has either. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the different counties start working on this, and how that kind of fills into BCDC's Bay Adapt. But from our perspective, the good news is the BCDC was very actively engaged in giving us feedback, and we have, I think, good relationships with them to kind of get over any or move past any concerns about inconsistencies between what we're trying to do and what they're trying to do.
And we plan to be pretty closely engaged on, they're working on, like I mentioned, that regional planning guidance. And I've been in touch with their staff that are helping lead that, and they're hoping to continue to engage with One Shoreline as they develop that. And we can learn from each other as they're wrestling with these issues on a more Bay-wide scale, and we're wrestling with it at the county-wide scale. I think there's a lot that we can learn from each other.
Sounds good.
Any public comments?
Yeah, let's check to see if we have public comments today on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the public, if you wish to comment on item 4A, please do raise your hand now in Zoom. Yeah, I see one hand raised, actually two now. So I'll call on Susan first and then Samuel. Susan, Hardin, you'll have 2 minutes, so please proceed.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Susan Desjardins, and I'm a chair of a program called Bay Alive for the Sierra Club Loma Prieta chapter. Thank you for this opportunity to give feedback on draft planning guidance document. We feel very strongly that flood protection infrastructure be built on solid ground and not within the mudflats of the bay. We request that you define the Bay Buffer Zone as the first 100 feet of firm ground upland of the San Francisco Bay shoreline. I know that you just addressed that issue, but I think BCDC's definition really had fewer concerns in mind when that was developed. We also think that the rights of way for levees and other flood protection infrastructure should be sufficiently wide to allow for future levee widening on the upland side and not in the bay. We'd like to see much stronger emphasis on the ecological assets of the bay and maintaining and improving community resilience and well-being. We recommend that ecological assets be included under the umbrella of public and critical facilities, infrastructure, and assets, and integrated into the community resilience goals for safety and land use elements. It would be helpful to identify areas with high opportunity for natural or nature-based resilience strategies in your future conditions mapping. We note that shoreline infrastructure options for specific projects is currently listed only as wall and or gradual slope with natural infrastructure. Also include, and I think you addressed this, beaches, eelgrass beds, and oyster beds. We encourage specifically low impact public access to this bay shoreline and creeks, such that adverse effects on wildlife would be avoided or minimized. We would like to discourage the following land uses within the sea level rise overlay district and within creek setback zones. That would be landfills, water and sewage treatment plants, animal research labs, high containment life science labs being BSL 3 and 4, underground parking and residential housing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Susan. Next, I'll call on Samuel Casillas. Sam, you'll have 2 minutes, so please proceed.
Hi, all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Sam Casillas. I actually live in Pacifica, but I know that a lot of people will be looking at this document and hopefully using it as a template around the whole Bay Area. Couple things. One thing is I commend you for looking at nature-based solutions, and hopefully there'll be more of an expansion on that, and actually encouraging more of the cities and the counties to look at nature-based solutions as probably one of the top solutions they should be using. The other thing is that I know that there was a little bit of ambiguity as to what level of sea level rise to be using. And from what I read in the document was that, it was more based on, I'm not even sure what it was based on, but that, it was sort of a compromise there. I think we've seen that there is no slowing in how much global warming is occurring. And we've heard from a lot of experts that we should just be going to the high risk. So, at this point, I don't even think there should be any ambiguity in saying, well, should we stick it at 6? We should be using 10 feet plus. We know this. The global warming is only getting worse. So, if there's any way to really be looking at that, I think it would behoove us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. This time I'll make the last call for folks to raise their hand to speak on item 4A. Okay, our last speaker will be Eileen McLaughlin. So right now I'll call on Geeta Dave. Geeta, you'll have 2 minutes, followed by our last speaker, Eileen. Please proceed, Geeta.
Thank you. As you said, there's praise for one shoreline on the document, and we cannot emphasize that enough. So thank you. I'm Geeta Dev. I'm with the Sierra Club with the Sustainable Land Use Committee. And I wanted to ask how we could differentiate between sites that have, extremely high liquefaction risk versus those that have moderate liquefaction risk. It's of some concern from a sustainability standpoint to see so many projects go in in areas that have such high risk of seismic loss. And particularly, I know that you're planning to do infrastructure next year or over this next year. But really concerned when I see Redwood City approve housing projects, swimming pool projects on the other side of 101, when you know there's absolutely no plan in place for the infrastructure as they've had to do, say, in Florida. So I think that's one concern. And the other one is just, it would really be great if we could get support for One Shoreline to discourage the more dangerous, the more risky labs that Susan Desjardins mentioned, the biosafety level 3 and 4. Right now, most jurisdictions just don't have any regulations on what levels of labs, and I think that's from lack of understanding. And most labs are at the level of BSL 1 and BSL 2. So it would be great if we could explicitly say that there's a danger to the infrastructure and to the bay if we go any beyond that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Oh, I do have hand raised by Director Miller, so I guess he is online now. So let me promote him to be a panelist. Give me 1 second. Okay. So just for the record, Director Miller is present and joined the meeting at 4:40 p.m.
Suki, well, I appreciate that. I don't believe I can under the current law, so I'm just going to speak as give a public comment and just ask Len if he could just go ahead and confirm the questions that I have in public comment, and not to go too far on a tangent. And I apologize for not being there. I had a Caltrain finance meeting that went very long, but I just wanted to just very quickly confirm, and it'll be evident why in a moment, that this document does not touch the coast in any way, that the document and that there is no current plan from One Shoreline to remove the breakwater, adopted plan to remove the breakwater at Pillar Point Harbor, that Len spoke to the Harbor Commission last week at the invitation of the Harbor Commission, and that One Shoreline is not stopping the Harbor Commission from dredging Pillar Point Harbor. There seems to be some confusion about that in the community over Len being invited to speak there last week on what was a consultant's report. And want to make clear that as a director of this board, I'm not in support of removing the breakwater. But if you could confirm all those things, it would clear up a lot of confusion on the coast, both with respect to this document and also as to what the nature of was to that visit to the Harbor Commission last week.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you, Director Mueller. Thanks for joining us. Yes, so here are my responses on those questions. The document before us on this agenda item is a planning guidance policy for cities along the Bay Shoreline only. The 12 cities between Brisbane and East Palo Alto. And not other cities within the county, Pacific Coast side or elsewhere. I did present at the Harbor District Commissioners board meeting on Wednesday, and at the request of the Harbor District General Manager, and we presented on a study that we had completed last year about the long-term resilience of the harbor, as well as Princeton, which is within the harbor, as well as Highway 1, which is just south of the harbor, and Miramar, which is south of Surfers Beach. And so in that study includes many options for long-term resilience. And there's no particular option that's on the table right now for One Shoreline to consider, which is why we haven't brought it to the board. And so there's no there in terms of a project that folks should either be supportive of, and there are people who are supportive of many aspects of what our study showed. But there's no whether you support an aspect of it or don't like an aspect of it, there's nothing at this point to propose as a particular project. Let's see, I think there were other questions.
We're not
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, you're not.
On the dredging effort, you know, I stated at the Harbor District Board meeting and previously that we as a short-term solution, let's call it, very short-term, to the Harbor District's concerns about boating navigation within the harbor, that dredging the built-up sand and placing it at Surfers Beach, that project of theirs would help both what they need, which is navigation within the harbor, and it could potentially help Surfers Beach to have sand along the highway. And it would also actually help anyone who's thinking about long-term resilience, because it would help all of us get a better understanding of how sand moves around when it's placed at Surfers Beach, if it stays there or if it migrates to the south past Miramar and Murata Road area. So there are reasons to support that effort in addition to just the boating and navigation issues. And so I stated that at the Harbor Commission meeting last Wednesday and previous to that as well.
Great. So we're not blocking it in any way.
We're not blocking any way, and if anything, we were presented with the opportunity to work with the Army Corps of Engineers on a study in the harbor area. And so again, it's not just the harbor, it's the harbor area. But we were presented by the Corps of Engineers with an opportunity to work with them on a study. And we handed that over to the Harbor District to work with the Corps of Engineers. And one of the reasons we did that is we knew that they had a project that they were eager to begin working on, and that's the dredging project. And we thought that it might be helpful to them if they had the Corps working with them on this study at this point, because the Corps is one of the agencies that needs to provide a permit for that project. We thought it would be helpful to the harbor if they had the Corps if they were the local sponsor on a study rather than One Shoreline. So we're not standing in the way in any way, and any assertions to that are you know, not true. And we've heard assertions that are not true multiple times in this issue, and that's one of them.
I appreciate it. I'm ending my public comment. Thank you for indulging me, Chair.
Thank you for all that clarification, Mr. Manning.
Of course.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, go ahead.
We have other speakers on the topic.
That's correct. And just for clarification, through Chair Pine, Director Mueller is able to join, but he cannot take any action or vote. So just wanted to give that clarification. And then in regards to public comment, we have Eileen McLaughlin, and then our one other speaker, our last speaker will be Carlisle Anion. Eileen, you have 2 minutes, please proceed.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Pine and members of the board. I am Eileen McLaughlin with the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. First, we strongly commend One Shoreline for producing this guidance and are hopeful that county jurisdictions will use it to define their own paths to reduce risks. There are 2 issues that, if addressed, we believe can make the document ever more effective. The first is natural infrastructure. While there are numerous references to natural infrastructure, the document doesn't express a One Shoreline position, endorsing its use wherever and whenever possible. Additionally, we found descriptions of natural infrastructure that were inadequate and inaccurate. There is an overdependence on mentioning ecotone use when there are substantial parts of the county shoreline where ecotones are often inappropriate, such as in the North County. In descriptions, it is important to define ecotones as gently sloped with its toe at or above the high tide line. The North County can use beaches, eelgrass beds, and oyster beds and similar. We strongly endorse natural infrastructure and hope you do so by reflecting it in the document. The second concern is that the document defines the shoreline buffer zone as the same as the BCDC band, a band that by location often lies totally or partially in bay mud. The document discusses migration of that band while current regional discussions recognize that the BCDC jurisdiction is dated and inadequate. We observe that migrating with the band is to follow the encroachment of the seas and not get ahead of it. Just as one shoreline sets new standards with future conditions and adapted pathways, there's a need to lead with a buffer zone that identifies existing available firm ground. We ask one shoreline to reconsider the buffer zone definition to lead the best of protection decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen.
Yes.
Our last speaker for this item 4A will be Carlisle and Young. Carlisle, you'll have 2 minutes, so please proceed.
Thank you. I saw this report, but I didn't really see if there's a dollar amount applied to it. And if so, who's going to pay for it or how are you going to pay for it? And Supervisor Mueller did bring up the fact that it doesn't really include anybody on the coast side. And years ago, they passed Measure AA to tax every parcel in the whole 9 Bay Area counties. And it turned out that that's only for Bayside improvements to the shoreline. So I'm hoping that you guys, if you do pass funding, you'll bifurcate it and charge the cities that are involved and not the entire county. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, that was end of public comment.
Okay, any further comment from the board?
Question. So it sounds like the Sierra Club's been going to cities and they're advocating around their own conversation around life sciences, but we're not getting into local zoning. We're letting cities control and do their own local zoning, whatever they want to do on the front. Is that correct? I mean, I'm not sure it seems appropriate for this.
Well, I think what you're distinguishing is what is the intended use of the building?
Right.
And that's not our interest.
That's right.
That's not our
And
interest.
so I just want to point that out because the Sierra Club kind of repeatedly shows up at these meetings with, asking us to do things that are outside of the purview. What they should be doing is going to the local planning commissions and city council meetings and advocating there if they want, which it sounds like they are in some cities. But I just want to make sure that we're not sounding tone deaf or that we're not, seeming to not respond to their comments, that I think it's outside the purview of what we're working on right now.
Yeah. So what we've said, and this came up when we talked about, or when we showed to the board the RENA numbers that are in risk areas, the current or future flood, right, and future flood. And the position that I've taken is with that or with other uses is we're not about to say don't do it or only put certain uses in certain areas, but we are about saying if you put something in harm's way, make sure it's resilient to that harm. And that's the emphasis.
And as well, I might point out, like, for example, the city of Burlingame has our wastewater treatment plant built right on the shoreline. So, we have no plans to say, for example, retreat that asset. We just can't afford to do it. So I appreciate the commentary, but the reality of the current built environment and local city zoning is not something that we are going to mandate or push and that's just beyond, I think, right now what we're.
Yeah, I mean, so it becomes more, let's say, nuanced if you're talking about maybe underground parking.
Yes,
right?
of course.
And
100%.
so underground parking is a type of use. And so I don't want to say that we're completely kind of divorcing ourselves from the type of use, but putting underground parking right along the bay shoreline we may want to think hard about that before we make those decisions.
And the economics of that make no sense. I can just tell you that, like, it just does not, the amount of water pumping and water removal systems, the seismic work you have to do on that just is economically like untenable. At least that's what we've seen in every project that's come before us. So everything's above ground.
All right, thank you. I think that concludes this item. So we'll move to 4B, which concerns authorizing a grant agreement with San Mateo County for $300,000 for certain purposes that Mr. Madden will explain.
Okay, yes, so this is item 4B. And on May 9th, just short time ago, 2 weeks ago tomorrow, the County Board of Supervisors approved an agreement to provide One Shoreline with $300,000. And side note is that we thank Chair Pine. This was really his support was critical to putting this on the agenda, and we thank him for that. And this is from Measure K funds, which was a countywide measure initially approved in 2012. And so these funds are to be used for very specific purposes, and those are listed on the slide here. Really 3 projects. One is planning guidance policy that we've been talking about and the consultants that we've used for that policy. Another one, which we talked about in January and February, related to the majors in March, or not March, April, the major storms that we saw this winter. We intend to expand our network of flood early warning system gauges to at least 2 additional creeks. And so these Measure K funds could be used for that. And then the third item also relates to the storms that we saw. And that is to develop a 5-year maintenance, so-called maintenance permit for creeks, specifically targeted to the areas that resulted in flooding in Bayside communities over the past, in December 31 through mid-March. And those 5-year permits are relatively common on a broad basis. I think almost every county in the Bay Area has one of those. San Mateo County actually has one, but it's just focused on county roads and parks. And what our maintenance permit would do, which would be with all the regulatory agencies, Department of Fish and Wildlife, State Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Regional Water Quality Control Board, and the Corps of Engineers, and potentially BCDC, depending on what locations of creeks we're talking about. What our permit would do would be focus very specifically on areas that either under Highway 101 or El Camino or adjacent to those roadways that caused flooding again this past winter. In one of the creeks, it's not associated with either of those 2 roadways, but it is associated with the Caltrans right of way, which is right near Marsh Road from Appleton Channel. So those are the 3 uses, and we don't know exactly yet how much will be applied to each of these uses from the $300,000, and that's because we're waiting to get more responses from potential consultants on this 5-year stream maintenance permit. That's the big ticket item among the 3 of these by far, and we want to get a sense of that before we start figuring out where they're going. And the county has been great in giving us that flexibility, saying we want to see these things done. We support this with $300,000, and we'll report back to them on kind of how it's all allocated. So what's brought to the board today is asking for authorization that I sign the contract that was provided in the board packet. Again, the county board of Supes already approved it on May 9, and I'll answer any questions.
Quick question. I think this is great, Len. It's and I thank you, Chair Pine, for your work and helping secure this. In terms of the flood maintenance and the prevention, I know there's some areas you've talked about dredging as a possible option. Does that would that fit in under the maintenance permit potentially? Yeah. Something we look at on that? Okay.
For sure.
Great.
For sure. In fact, another way of saying maintenance is, in our case, of what we're talking about, it's really debris removal. And most of that debris is sediment that's built up under the highway or upstream of the highway or other areas. And we've seen that in San Carlos for sure.
Yeah.
As well as other communities, fortunately. And it's not uncommon for these creeks to be maintained in this way. The regulatory agencies support these permits. There are sometimes very substantial, not restrictions, but details related to when you can do it, how you do it, and the methods used and things like that.
Right. Thank you.
Any further comment? We just check for public comments, Vicky.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the public, if you wish to comment on item 4B regarding the agreement with San Mateo County for $300,000, please do raise your hand now in Zoom. Okay, I don't see, oh, I see one hand raised. And it's from Geeta Dave. Geeta, you'll have 2 minutes, so please proceed.
Hello again, this is Geeta Dev. This is actually just a question to Len and the board. I'm just curious, the $300,000 in Measure K funds, is that to be used as matching funds in order to get other funds? Or do you think that the $300,000 would actually cover the work? That's it. That was my question.
Okay, thank you, Geeta.
Suki, I'll respond to that if that's okay. So the $300,000 does not complete the work. We know that there will be additional funds needed for the planning guidance policy, and that's been programmed into our budget at One Shoreline. And the installation of the creek gauges as part of our flood early warning system, that will be matched by the state of California. We have a grant from the Department of Water Resources for that project overall countywide, and certainly some of those funds would be used. And again, I can't specifically parse out what it looks like. I'm certainly hopeful that $300,000 in its entirety would cover this 5-year maintenance permit for doing the dredging work. And the other 2 projects would be matched on some level. And that was indicated in the report for the Board of Supervisors to the county, that there would be some level of match.
And Chair Pine, sorry, I don't see any other hands raised, so back to you, Chair.
Okay, so unless there's further comment, we can take a motion.
Move to approve item 4B.
Second,
We have a motion and a second. You call the roll. Mr.
Sure, I'll take the roll call. Director Schwan,
aye?
Director Colson,
Yeah.
Director Cocchier,
Yes.
Director Rack,
Yes.
and Chair Pine.
Yeah,
Thank you. Motion passes with Directors Mueller and Ruddick being absent.
thank you. So we're moving now to 4C, which is a discussion of the fiscal year 2022-23 budgets, as well as a look at the fiscal year 2023-2024. This is not an action item. We will have to take action on this at our next meeting. Mr. Madden.
Okay, thank you, Chair Pine. I'll start with this item by saying most of the work on this item was done by our finance manager, Lucy Dawn. She is actually out of town today. She's at a Government Finance Officers Association annual meeting, and hopefully learning a lot and having a good time. So thanks, Lucy, for joining us. If there are questions, and she's available to answer questions as well. Okay, so I will start with the big picture on our operating budget, which is our estimated reserve balance at the end of each of the next 4 fiscal years. So what this shows is where we are today is where it says we are here at almost July 1, 2023. And again, this is set the stage. This is a kind of briefing on the status of the budget as of for this fiscal year and the proposal for next fiscal year. The details of all that will be presented to the board at the June 26th meeting for final approval of our FY 23-24 fiscal year budget. So we are here approximately just shy of July 1, 2023. And in the 22-23 fiscal year, our anticipation is that at the end of this fiscal year, our reserves will be about $3.144 million. Our expense, that's to give you a sense, our operating expenses this year, we're looking at $1.33 million. So it's a pretty healthy reserve. And that's important, as you'll see as time goes on. The FY 23-24 budget, we'll talk about that again in the next slide, but I just want to say our income from Measure K includes the 300,000, assumed 300,000 that we just voted on, as well as $1.75 million general Measure K grant that is not yet approved by the County Board of Supervisors, but it is slated to be considered by them at the June budget hearings towards the end of the month. Does that sound
Right, and the high certainty of passage.
Yeah. And so this was discussed a month or two back by the board, along with many other Measure K items for next year's budget. And so that's in there in the $2 million in Measure K income. Another line below that is San Mateo County Emergency Declaration. And that refers to two specific projects that we did. One was in Belmont Creek, and that was to remove debris that was in Belmont Creek right after New Year's Eve storm. And the other one was related to work done in San Francisco Creek, also related to debris, but in this case, it was large vegetation that we hired a contractor to go in and cut up so that it didn't float down and either cause damage to property or get stuck under one of the bridges, that kind of thing. It was an unincorporated part of San Francisco Creek's watershed, close to Highway 280. So those two projects we're anticipating to get reimbursed for through and we've been working with the county's Department of Emergency Management Colin has to seek reimbursement as part of the county's seeking reimbursement from ultimately FEMA for the disaster declaration, and that's $41,500 approximately. The other income includes our state grants for Department of Water Resources for this early warning system, as well as the State Coastal Conservancy for both One Shoreline operations and the Burlingame and Millbrae project. That's what the other income relates to. So as we move out from today to essentially 4 years from now, July 1 of 2027, we're assuming an annual increase in expenses of 5%. Don't know what that's going to look like. And then also say that currently known revenue, which is indicated here, is expected to run out in July 1, 2026, and reserves run out about a year later. So that you see, as of July 1, 2027, under this scenario, we would have $100,000 left. Now, that's assuming we get no other money, which I think is a pretty, I'm very hopeful that we'll see other funding, and some of it through grants and other things, and some of which can go back to operating funds. But grant funding for projects is notoriously kind of skimpy as you can apply it to operating money. So it's not a long-term sustainability approach to say we're going to get 5 to 10% of the grant with the state, and we can use that towards operation. That doesn't fund it. But I think, where we started 3 years ago was we had 3 years of committed funding from all the cities matched by the county. And as you can see, we've now extended those 3 years really for an additional 4 years, because those 3 years were 2020, 2021, 2022. And not 4 years, we were expended for additional about 4.5 years to have funding for the agency's operation. So kind of good news, bad news. But that's the snapshot, assuming the budgets that I'll show you in the following 3 slides. So here's our operating budget, and these are draft numbers that will be provided in as not as draft or as more final draft, let's say, on June 26th. And what we looked at for the approved budget was a revenue of $2.1 million, expenses of $1.6 million, and an end of year balance of reserves of $3.3 million. What it's looking like now, we'll see, is less revenue by $200,000. And this is really due to the timing of reimbursements from the state, and those $200,000 we anticipate coming in the next fiscal year after July 1. So we're not terribly concerned about that number. In terms of expenses, there's $300,000 less, 1.634 to, in fact, we're looking at 1.332 million. And the reasons for that are we sought but haven't yet hired a additional project manager who we're still seeking and working on. And also, so that's part of that savings. And then the other item is we reallocate some of our expenses for operations to the flood control zones as we work in the Colma Creek zone or the San Bruno zone or San Francisco zone. And we were able to reallocate more than anticipated to those zones. So that reduces the expense to our operating budget. So in terms of the end of year reserves balance, we're looking at $3.14 million. And then going into next year's draft operating budget that you'll see in detail next month, we have revenue, as you just saw on the previous slide, of 3.3 million almost, total expenses of 1.8. That's an assumption that we hire somebody soon in the project manager role and other project related expenses that are up, including things like the 300,000 for Measure K that we just approved. Those projects are going to be done in the next year and increase expenses for next year as well. And those are obviously largely offset by the grant. So the result of all of that is we anticipate an end of year balance of almost $4.6 million. And as you saw before, depending on revenue projections, that could start declining, but that's pretty good reserves that we anticipate. That's just operating, not flood zones. As you'll see with the flood zones, it gets more complicated and larger numbers. So here are the flood zones. We have 3 active flood zones for Colma Creek, San Bruno, which is on the left. Those are 3 columns, not the far left, but those 3 columns for Colma, and then San Bruno in the middle, and then San Francisco on the right. The approved budget for Colma had revenue of 4.3 million almost, expenses of 3.5 million, and an end of year reserves of $31 million. So relative to everything else we do, this is our biggest kind of bank account. And now I have to say that included within that 31 million, we're paying off a long-term bond that has, I don't remember the exact balance, but our earliest opportunity to pay it off, which is what we're looking at, would be 2025, August of 2025. And we're seriously looking at that because the interest that's being paid on it is well above our returns. And so we'll bring that back to the board, in a year or so when we get more detail on that. But I just want to say we have a good, healthy balance on that, which can be applied to projects, but we also have a liability associated with that bond. The draft budget for Colma Creek, we're looking at approximately what we spent this year, which is just over $5 million. I'm sorry, revenue of just this year of over $5 million. That's from property taxes within the 5 cities of Colma Creek watershed. And we're looking at expenses a little higher than what we spent this year. There is a project in the Colma Creek watershed that we anticipate starting August of this year. So in the next fiscal year, and that's a project to repair many outfalls of storm drains that flow into Colma Creek between Highway 101 and Utah Avenue. So in the downstream stretch of Colma Creek. And that would leave an end of year balance of $35 million, $35.6 million. So San Bruno, there's a lot less money. A lot less money is collected in revenue, and the expenses this year of $600,000. We anticipate about the same amount, both in terms of revenue and expenses in San Bruno Creek watershed. We applied for money from Cal OES, which is FEMA money, to start planning a pretty large project at the downstream areas of San Bruno Creek. Folks will remember that the city of San Bruno has a neighborhood called the Bel Air neighborhood, which floods frequently. It's a low-income neighborhood. And we've shown pictures of their flooding pretty often. It's right at the intersection of 380 and 101, and they're in the FEMA flood zone. So we submitted an application to Cal OES to begin design on a project that would address flooding in that area, and also actually go up to Colma Creek, because the mouth of San Bruno Creek is just about less than 1,000 feet south of the mouth of Colma Creek, and they're so close that it makes sense for us to be kind of extending our work at the mouth of San Bruno Creek, where we own and operate a tide gate, to the mouth of San Bruno Creek, where there's a Corps of Engineers project to look at their water treatment plant, which is just as Colma Creek enters the bay. So if we get that grant, which we're pretty hopeful about now, we've gotten some really positive news about it lately in the last few weeks, then it would probably increase the income and expenses from San Bruno watershed.
How much is that grant?
We asked for $900,000 for a $1.2 million project to do planning and design. Yeah, and the extra 300 would be a local match from the zone. That's the idea. So 900 in federal money and 300 in local money. That's the idea. San Francisco Creek, that has the least amount of funding. It always has, and that has revenue. This year's revenue of about 482,000 at year end, we anticipate. Next year, we anticipate less, although I'm not really sure that will pan out. It's really driven by property taxes, and so it depends on what the county collects and passes on to us. The expenses are a little bit higher, and one thing I'll note, Chair Pine is on the San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority Board, and our expenses are exceeding our revenue. And the expenses mostly go towards the San Francisco Creek JPA. That's probably 85% or so, what you guys say, of the budget. And so that number has been going up. And it's not something that I'm worried about, but it's just something to note and to be conscious of going forward, is that we do have a limited amount of money for that watershed and the projects. And the projects include work upstream of Highway 101, and that's a very complicated, expensive project along East Palo Alto and Menlo Park, and then Palo Alto on the other side. And I think sometime soon there will be earnest discussions about how to pay for that from the agencies that make up the JPA, which are us, cities of Menlo Park and East Palo Alto, City of Palo Alto, and the Santa Clara Valley Water District. I did want to say one thing, as long as I have that topic. Last board meeting, we looked at approving the JPA agreement, and there were questions. I think Director Mueller especially had questions about when the park should approve it first, and we decided to put it off. My plan is to bring it back to the board for consideration in June. Not all the other jurisdictions have yet approved it, and rather than bring it back today and kind of have the same conversation about who's approved it and waiting for others, just bring it back in June. East Palo Alto has approved it. Menlo Park just approved it, and I think it's going to Palo Alto and Valley Water first week of June or so. Back to the budget. So this is on the flood zone budget. If there are questions, we can go back to it or take them out. Then capital budget. Okay. This one is kind of complicated table, so I'm going to walk through it a little bit. And I have handy colored arrows to help me do that. So what this basically does is it looks at two projects, a Bayfront Canal and Appleton Channel project, BCACP, and the Millbrae Burlingame project. We do have other projects, and we may want to think about in future years kind of how to do this. Like when we install capital equipment into the creeks for the early warning system, we don't consider that a capital project, but it is a capital investment, and we have to insure it and all these other things, even though it's small scale. So I don't know, I think this is still an evolving kind of picture, but for now, for this year, next fiscal year, we're going to continue what we've done, which is these two projects. So starting with the revenue side of the Bayfront Canal, for this current fiscal year ending in a month, we'll have revenue of $634,000. The expenses, where the second pink arrow showed up, they're about 291,000, so less than half that, resulting in a year-end balance for this project of $343 almost $1,000. So what that means is we have, the way that this project is funded is a funding agreement among One Shoreline and the cities of Menlo Park and Redwood City and Atherton, San Mateo County. So those entities are providing funds for this project through a funding agreement that we signed in 2020. And we're getting down to the end of that. And we have this amount of money left in that to kind of deal with an issue that we brought up at a previous board meeting related to the joints inside the culvert and future operations and maintenance. So those are the uses for this $343,000 ongoing operations and maintenance, which is performed by the city of Redwood City on our behalf. We're the owners of this project. Okay, so at the end of this fiscal year, we anticipate $343,000. And looking at next year's budget, we anticipate additional revenue from that funding agreement of $218,000, but we'll have expenses exceeding that of $355,000. Okay, so now in the next fiscal year, we'll have a shortfall of $137,000, and that will leave you at the end of the next fiscal year, and that includes operations and maintenance. We'll have about $206,000. That's what we anticipate having for future operations and maintenance. And when that money runs out, we'll need a new funding agreement to keep to operating and maintaining it. And we knew going in, we wanted to have a little bit of reserves to be able to operate and maintain it for a few years, get a sense of how much it would cost to do that, and then produce a new funding agreement. We certainly didn't want the funding to only fund construction and then have everybody kind of scramble to figure out how to pay for the maintenance, especially when we had big storms this year. There was probably more O&M needed than in previous years. You were just saying water was diverted from the canal into the Fish and Wildlife Service ponds 9 times this winter, and that's a lot. We weren't anticipating that. That's because there were high flows in the canal 9 times that it went over the threshold and went into the facility of this project and then put water into the ponds. That's the design of the project. We just didn't, and every time it happens, there's trash that accumulates and other things that we go in and deal with. So that's the Bay Front Canal funding snapshot. Now to the other project, Millbrae and Burlingame. So this year, the revenue on that project, and what you'll see is revenue and expenses match, and that's what is intended. The revenue was 1.5 million and expenses of over 1.5 million for this year. And so there's no year-end balance. So that's basically, we get invoices from the consultant, we add staff time for One Shoreline, we send it off to the State Coastal Conservancy and they reimburse it. And so we're hoping that the timing, how that lines up so that it's within a fiscal year. The next fiscal year, we have the same issue. We have greater expenses and greater revenue of a little over $2 million. And at the end of it, what this means is that after June 30th, 2024, we'll have $403,000 left. Our goal by that time, by the end of June 2024, is to complete what's in what's called Task Order 1, which is a draft environmental impact report and a 30% design on the project. There's a lot to do between now and then, but that's the objective. And the funding timing, that could slip, but the funding is pretty much in place for this year's money plus next year's money to pay for that. And so what we want to do soon, and this is mostly directed towards Director Colson, is not, it's not urgent, but soon start having a conversation about, okay, how do we take the draft EIR to a final EIR and 30% design? Because our state money will run out after that $400,000.
Yeah.
And so the cities of Millbrae and Burlingame should start to plan, not for FY 23-24, but FY 24-25. What does that look like?
And if we can just kind of get a handle on those numbers, we can put those in our CIP budget.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah. And so, right. So, so that's a snapshot of our capital projects budget. So I'm glad to answer questions about operations or flood zones or capital projects.
Through the chair, I just have a quick question on the, let's see which one it is, the BCA. So why is it that in the draft year 2023, it's showing a deficit of 137? When there's actually carryover from the year before? Is that just the accounting practices of way that you show the dollars?
Yeah, so what I was intending to show was the year-end number,
Okay.
not the cumulative, right? So
Okay.
for that particular fiscal year, there's a deficit. The only one that's in the cumulative, and I know it's confusing, and I was going around and around on how to do this. But the only one that's really cumulative is the bottom, that's the far right column bottom, which takes into account, okay, at the end of it all, that's what we have. Otherwise, it's fiscal year.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
What happens if there's capital left over after all the work is done? Does it roll into the sort of general fund of our operations? Or no?
Well, it would depend on the project.
Okay.
For Bayfront Canal, it would not, it would just continue to contribute to O and M
Okay.
by Redwood City.
Okay.
We will not have that luxury with the mill
Yeah,
rate.
that will be negative, will be contributing. So with regard to contributing, what I would suggest is that just a memorandum to like Helen, Lisa, Syed, Helen, this is what we anticipate. And we'll start that. We're just finishing our budget for this, so we can do it this time next year. Like we would start it in January of next year. I'll be the mayor, so it should be helpful. I can organize that for us.
Yeah.
Make sure we get that in our capital improvement budget.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking we would want to have serious conversations this fall.
Yeah, I think so. And then back to the operating budget, may I?
Yeah, of
start,
course.
Brian? Back to the operating budget, as we begin to get to the end of 24, 25. If we have any kind of voter sort of supported ideas about anything about going to the voters, I think we're gonna need some runway on that. And if not, the good news is, I don't know what the rest of your budgets look like, but we start to get really much more solid in like 26, 20, 24, 25, 20, like 24 is the last of our kind of bad negative years.
Now.
We're good on the operating side. It's just our CIP budget is still been negative. So I don't know how people feel about, alternative B, which is sort of going back to the cities and asking for maybe another 3-year, or at least testing the waters to see who would be amenable to that. I think we have a lot of work to still do on the coast side, and it's the Bayside cities turn to help fund the operations to work on the coast side too, or whatever we need to do. And I think it would at least give us a sense of whether we could go and ask for, say, another 2 or 3 years operating. And maybe think about what that number would need to be. I think what was it, 10,000, 40,000 and something else. There was 3
Right.
levels.
Yeah, 3 years, depending on size, that's how it was done initially.
Mhm. So, I don't know how others feel, if they feel that it's valuable to their cities.
Definitely for us, it would be worth it to have that discussion.
I think it's worth bringing up because, I guess we don't know what the overall economy is gonna be looking like. To go to voters or something like that would be. I need to do,
We run out, is this the last year we pay, Len?
We pay.
Like the cities have paid, we committed to a 3-year payment.
No, that was, the last payments that we got were in the spring of 2022.
Okay, so does it behoove us to go back, say now, and just get that funding in place so we know we're extended out, and then we can layer on the other larger components, say, for example, parcel tax or something, down the road through the county?
Well, I mean, I guess my suggestion would be, we have a strategic planning committee.
Yeah, we need to activate that.
We could react, that hasn't met since the idea of the parcel tax was put off last summer. So we could reactivate that, and that subcommittee of the board could kind of explore those questions. If that's agreeable, then I could help to get that scheduled.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that would be good.
And then if you want to, if you get some financial numbers together, kind of estimates, we could always run it by finance and audit quickly, have a 15-20 minute meeting, get their blessing too, so we had sort of a comprehensive agreement. And then it would be, then we would just have to maybe what I'm trying to kind of shepherd this through is, I think Supervisor Pine, and who knows what's gonna happen in 24 and who's sitting in what seats, where, what, when, why. So at least securing, while you have long-standing people who are on the team, at least securing that financing for another 3 years, even if it lasts for 4, to get us through 27, 28, maybe another election year, might be really valuable, just to take a little pressure off you guys.
And I'm assuming that if we're asking the city, the county is also going to match.
That would be the idea, yeah. I think we can make that happen.
Well, that's really important, so.
I mean, I think, Dave, your leadership has been really instrumental in this, and given you're terming out, I'm gonna just be blunt about it, you're terming out in 24. We don't know, your leadership's just been really stable, you've had a very smooth hand on the tiller, you've been very visionary around it, so having your voice and your support, I think, would be important before your term ends.
Agreed.
Let's get that strategic planning committee.
And the communities, we're benefiting from the work of
Oh, yeah,
One Shoreline, we're
hugely.
Sounds good.
All right, let's see if we have any public comments on this presentation.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the public, if you wish to comment on item 4C regarding the 2022-2023 operating budget, please do raise your hand now in Zoom. Okay, I do see one hand raised from Geeta Dev. Geeta, you'll have 2 minutes, so please proceed.
Thank you. Maybe I'm the only one who's still listening. Gita Dev with the Sierra Club. I actually have a few questions and comments. And you may not particularly like them either. One was something we've discussed with Len Matterman before, which is our concern about the sewer treatment plants and the fact that they're all slowly getting submerged or below water. And this idea of having satellite waste treatment plants further uphill. It's whenever you talk to city managers, they say, look, we've spent multi-millions, billions of dollars on our plant and we can't afford to. And, I heard Mayor Colson, you also said that we can't afford to. But in a way, sometimes I feel like we can't afford not to. And maybe this is the group that has to plant the seed about thinking about treating sewer, in satellite phases uphill so as to keep so much of it from ending up at the bay. And that's, Menlo Park has a perfectly good one at Sharon Park Golf Course. We have golf courses and parks that can, in fact, benefit from this all the way down the hill. So that is something I wonder if somewhere in your long range planning, you can start putting into people's brains that, we can't continue to send all the water down to the bottom of the hill and then pump it all back up. It's very expensive and it's not very practical. So that's just a comment from your long range plan. The other question I have is, I heard that, we've been involved with the Bayfront Canal and the Atherton Canal. And I did listen that you have 9 overflows. And I was wondering whether this year, I thought I saw articles about the mobile home park people evacuating in the, when we had those real, atmospheric rivers. And I was wondering whether it would just be interesting to know whether, in fact, all the work that we've done is avoiding the problem of flooding. So that's just a question. And the Third thing is an observation about the San Francisco Creek and East Palo Alto and Palo Alto Golf Course. I do know people on the Parks and Rec Commission in Palo Alto, and they do express some concern about the fact that the San Francisco Creek's embankments on either side, the levees on either side, from terms of long-term resilience, really, it would seem logical that areas like the golf course should provide the kind of resilience so as to avoid flooding ever into East Palo Alto's residential neighborhoods. And I'm wondering how we can start that conversation about longer term resilience in terms of allowing parks and golf courses to be occasional retention areas rather than saying, well, you know, and actually it turns out that the levee on the golf course side is a little higher than the levee on the Palo Alto, East Palo Alto side. So it's just those kinds of long range thinking doesn't seem to penetrate as far as one would like. So these are observations. I'm not sure, you know, it's appropriate to say that, but in this small group, I feel like I can be frank. Thank you.
Thank you, Geeta. I don't see any other hands raised, Chair, so back to you.
Right, you had raised your hand, Ms. Member?
I just have a really brief comment to one of the points that Geeta mentioned regarding the regarding the golf course and the levees and the East Palo Alto project, which I have some familiarity with. The levee heights on both sides are the same, period. The levees on the golf course side are not higher than the levees on the East Palo Alto side. And it's a fair question to say, should a golf course or other open space be used as potential flood basin? In this case, what was decided was that golf course land would be used for a widened creek channel. And that's the main strategy that flood protection was provided for East Palo Alto and Palo Alto downstream of 101. Was the creek was essentially very significantly widened into the Palo Alto golf course, and that widened creek along with higher levees is what provides the protection. That's not to say that in some cases golf courses or ball fields or other open space can be used as an overflow floodplain that's a treatment that's not unusual and sometimes works really well if you need the space. And been built in both cities, those kinds of. Stanford has that, Valley Water has done that in Mountain View, where you basically have baseball little league diamonds that are once every 20 years used as a floodplain, and that's an appropriate use to get people out of the flood zone and harm's way. Stanford has that for some of their soccer fields in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Pine, I have a 6 o'clock closed session then. Get ready for council meetings, so.
Thanks for being here. All right, I think this concludes the discussion of the budget, and we'll.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Sorry, I do see one other hand raised. It's up to you if you want to call on that speaker.
Okay, go ahead.
Sure. Carlisle, I believe you're going to speak on item 4C, so you'll have 2 minutes, so please proceed.
Thank you. I don't think I'll need 2 minutes. I was just going to also comment on what the person from, I think her name is Geeta from the Sierra Club said, and that is, at least on the coast side, we have a 500-acre county park. And even though they did a master plan for it, they completely ignored all the community input about the excessive flooding that comes flowing out of the park. And it would be a wonderful spot to make a retention pond and hold back some of that water from flowing down into the Pacific Ocean and also onto the Murata Surf West property, which then floods the new trail on the highway that was cost them $4 million to build, and it became a muddy mess back in the storms. But for some reason, they chose to ignore it. And it would be really a good idea to keep retain that water on county land instead of letting it flood the neighborhoods. So that's a long range plan, but I certainly like her idea and would like to commend her for suggesting that.
Okay, thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
All right, then that concludes the discussion of the budget, and we'll revisit the final budget at the next meeting. I do not have a chair's report today, so Mr. Madman, we'll turn to you for a CEO report.
Sure. Okay. There we go. So several items to mention. On April 13th, we had a Resilient Communities Workshop that was co-hosted by One Shoreline and the Leadership Council. One of their community acceleration project teams did a workshop or led a workshop with us and community-based organizations, mostly in the social services sector. And the purpose of this was to explore the overlap and potential alignment between the work of One Shoreline and the social services sector in terms of climate resilience. And certainly one of my objectives to broaden the understanding and level of interest and alignment between climate issues and multiple sectors of society, so that organizations that advocate for affordable housing or utilities or transportation issues see climate as one of the issues that they need to be thinking. So that was a great event, and I think there's a little bit of follow-up with this community acceleration project team, and we're glad to be working with the Leadership Council. And I mentioned that one of our board members is one of the founders of the Leadership Council, Marie Schwamp, and thank her for actually making this connection a long time ago. So the next item is related to our coordination with Caltrans, and this relates to the stream maintenance permit issue. I mentioned before under that agenda item that Caltrans sites at Highway 101 and El Camino especially relate to this. So we've been working with Caltrans so that their removal of debris through their maintenance division for District 4, which is the whole Bay Area, is their work is done in concert with our work. So we're talking with them in terms of their work on San Bruno Creek, San Mateo Creek, Belmont Creek, Cordilleras Creek, and Atherton Channel. And so there are many cities that potentially benefit from that. Caltrans, I think a lot of times is seen as a difficult to reach agency. Obviously they're large and they have multiple divisions and they have multiple needs around the state, around the Bay Area, especially in regards to post-winter work. But over the last few months, I think they've been really responsive. Colin has been working with me and Caltrans to identify specific areas that they can do maintenance that would really benefit our communities. And so we're really hopeful about that. And I'll probably report out on that again in a month or so, because this is evolving. They're trying to get the work done before next winter, and we're strongly encouraging that to happen. State budget, potential climate resilience bond, and Assembly Bill 970. The state budget is difficult. The governor's revise did not add in a whole bunch of climate money that was proposed to be reduced from the previous years, which were very healthy increases in climate resilience money. The governor did propose more money for flooding, flood protection, flood resilience, but that was really focused on the Central Valley, which has seen in Tulare Lake and other areas pretty substantial hit from the major storms. He did endorse the idea of a bond, and there's a lot of energy now around getting a bond out. There's a Senate bill and a Assembly bill. In the Senate side, it's Senator Allen from Northern California, and the Assembly side, it's Assemblymember Garcia. And so we've been working with Senator Becker to insert some language into the bond that would be particularly appropriate for agencies like ours to receive resilience funding. And they're very receptive to that. Fortunately, we had a meeting with Chair Pine and Vice Chair Ruddick with Senator Becker a few weeks ago, and I followed up with their staff as recently as today, and that's looking like a very positive development. But it is a bond that would have to go to the voters next year, so there's uncertainty.
Percentage pass on that? Is it 50+1?
I think so.
I think it is, yeah, majority vote. And Assembly Bill 970 is with the California Department of Insurance. And this was mentioned before, is to have the Department of Insurance establish what's called the Climate and Sustainability Insurance Risk Reduction Program. And it passed out of Assembly appropriations, which is usually a very hard hurdle for bills, especially in a bad budget year. But it did pass out of appropriations on May 18th. And the reason that we're following that bill is it calls for 6 pilot projects around the state, 3 cities in Southern California, the Native American tribe in Southern California, Sacramento County, and One Shoreline as developing a pilot project around insurance programs that reduce risk and increase insurance uptake, especially in low-income communities. And it's the right thing to do and something that we could be really on the leading edge. And so we're supporting that bill. That bill would now go to the full assembly and on the Senate side. It has no opposition, so everyone's pretty hopeful about that. It's being sponsored by the California Department of Insurance, and the author is Luz Rivas from Southern California. Next board meeting, we have a lot of things on the agenda for pathage or potential pathage planning guidance policy for consideration. The budget, as we just talked about, the San Francisco Creek Joint Powers Authority agreement, the annual approval for water pollution control service charges for the countywide and the town of Pacifica, which we do every summer. We bring this to the board every summer. And agreements with San Mateo County potentially for services related to Department of Public Works. They provide service on our behalf in the flood zones, engineering services, and maintenance. And the county's county attorney's office. Brian Coolidge and his colleagues provide us with legal counsel support. And I'm proposing we extend that. So we'll bring that to the board. Though both of those things expire, Public Works and county attorney's office expire at the end of June. So we have to bring that soon. And then potentially a consultant agreement associated with that 5-year maintenance permit. As I said, we're talking with various consultants about that right now. And that's the CEO's report.
Very good. Thank you for the update. We'll just check quickly for public comment, Suki.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the public, if you wish to comment on item 6, the CEO's report, please do raise your hand now in Zoom. Okay, I don't see any hands raised, so back to you, Chair.
Okay, so before we wrap up, are there any board member updates or requests for future agenda items from the board? Okay, and seeing none, then we are adjourned for today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you all. The time is now 5:46 p.m. and the meeting is adjourned.
Unfortunately,